I've asked them to replace our faces with this piece of Norwegian conceptual art, which you'll see develop behind us. My name's Lewis Crofts. Thank you very much for the kind invitation to, can you hear me? To moderate the panel, to the EFTA Defence Authority, to the EFTA States. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd also like to thank my mum for watching at home. I'm sorry I forgot your birthday this year. I promised to remember that. So obviously, we're going to go down a little bit deeper into some of the political priorities we've just heard from those interesting interventions. Obviously, there's a lot to do with climate neutrality goals for 2050, reduction targets 55% of emissions in 2030, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. There's a lot to do, and clearly what we've heard so far today is that CCS plays a role in that, but also the agreement, the EEA agreements, the relationship between the EFTA states and the EU plays a role in that as well. It's our 30th anniversary to the EEA agreement. Happy birthday, everyone! Whoop whoop in the house. So we're gonna look at that as well. So to start with, I'm going to turn to you, Commissioner. We've heard a lot about the great potential of CCS. We've seen the fantastic demonstration earlier, but what's it going to take to make these projects, these technologies, commercially viable, make them a reality rather than, a demonstration?
From our side, we do know that to achieve our very ambitious targets for 2040 that we will set next week, and achieve climate neutrality demands a lot of investment, and most of this investment has to come from private sector. And to convince stakeholders to make these decisions, we need to create a predictability. And as I was mentioning earlier in my speech, we do need all the available technologies to meet these targets. So with our carbon management strategy, our aim is to create a single market for CO2 in Europe. We do know that already at this very moment, the first commercial contracts have been signed. So the contracts that capture CO2 here in Europe and transport them, for example, ship them to Norway, they are existing. But to build a single market, we do believe that we need common rules, and that helps us to create a market that is big enough to bring down the costs. And where we want to work is to set quality standards for CO2 streams so that the CO2 can flow freely across borders. It covers both transport routes and storage. And we do see that these standards should be the same for all continents. And so far, what we see already happening is that the front runners, also inside European Union, they're setting their own standards, and that means fragmentation of the market. Doesn't help us much. So the rules that we aim for setting are one thing that could create more affordable and large-scale projects, and then of course for us it is important that if we do have cross-border transport networks in place, that the operation of these has to be transparent, and there has to be open access for all the market participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Turning to you, you talked about how basically Norway's firing ahead. You've taken investment decisions, issued permits, and so forth. You also talked about how Norway's a first mover. You've perhaps got a first mover advantage. Maybe being a first mover, sometimes can be a blessing, but also a little bit of a curse. You were calling for people to join you on the journey, others to invest, to help build scale. Could you just, develop that idea of your first mover advantage, but in the European context, in the broader European context?
First of all, I think the most important thing that we can do, being an early mover, is to prove that the project is good, safely, and we do it properly way. I think that's maybe the most important thing we do. But of course, when we are an early mover, it's a risk, economic risk. We have the risk with the government contribution to the Longship. But I think Longship is very important to prove that it is a solution that are commercial available for the industry. And we can build on that experience to develop it. And we need, yes, common rules. We need, as the Ambassador Stephenson said in his speech, we need predictable rules and simple rules. So we can start it, because it's urgent that we are going forward and making a market for commercial contracts, from the capture facilities to the storage facilities. So I think the early mover have to show the European country and the world this is functioning, this is very well. And of course we see it, we saw it outside, and we saw it back here. We can do it safely and permanently, and we have to think about the cost for the industry, and we have to cooperate on how we can bring the cost down for industry to take part in the CO2 capture and storage capacity that we have. And we have a great potential in Norway, and we see a lot of interest to develop storage capacity, and also looking into how we can facilitate the infrastructure to bring down the cost. So I think we are having a moment just now that we have to need in a good way.
Thanks very much, Ambassador. Turning to you, don't want to give the first mover advantage just to Norway. There's some technological innovations as well in Iceland, notably the direct air capture. You've got a unique position also geographically. How does Iceland fit into the broader European solution?
Well, thank you, Leo. I think it's clear that Iceland can play a big role in the European context. First of all, it has been established that the Icelandic basalt could store huge amounts of CO2, and that should indeed be of interest to European countries. I understand lack of storage sites is seen as one of the obstacles for this potential to develop further. However, there are still several issues to consider also at home. We have, for example, not mapped all possible sites or identified them yet where we could store CO2, and mapping is indeed a costly exercise, and there are also other environmental aspects to be taken into account. There is also the issue of ownership of land that has to be taken into consideration. There is the question of acceptance when it comes to large-scale imports of CO2. Is it a business case only for the private sector to tackle, or is there a public interest for the state to get involved? So these are many questions, but perhaps not so clear answers to all of them as of yet.
Thank you, Commissioner. Coming back to you, there's a lot of legislation. There's a lot of legislative activity. There's the CCS directive from 2009, TEDI regulation, Net Zero Industry Act got a few mentions today already, still under negotiation. But this is the timescales that we're looking to incentivize people to build on, store on, permit on, explore, and so forth are very long, as the University of Bergen said earlier. But you know, you got 10 months left of this commission. When you reach the end, you look back at the body of legislation that you've got, the body of initiatives, regulations. Do you think that is sufficient to reach these 2030 goals that you mentioned and beyond? I mean, I heard the message earlier that you're not going to offer any proposal to regulate next week, but when you look back on the body of legislation that you've got, do you think that's sufficient for the incentives for CCS for the future?
If we are talking about the EU targets for 2030, then yes, my reply to you is yes. We have set a relatively solid framework. We have opened almost all the energy-related files due to the energy crisis, but also due to the fact that we saw that our governments and parliament were ready to accelerate green transition significantly. Saying that the infrastructure to transport CO2 still needs significant investments. First time ever, we opened our Trans-European Energy Network legislation for CO2 transport projects, and there was strong interest. So now we do have these projects in our list, but we need many more. What we are preparing now is the starting position for the next Commission. And the ones who know better how our work is organized, you do know that first we will present strategy and we will declare what we plan to do. So the communication about 2040 is all about that, to give predictability for our market participants that there are plans beyond 2030. 2030, these are already flagged in our national energy and climate plans, but what happens after that? And to achieve significant reduction of CO2 after 2030 needs all the tools at our disposal, so carbon capture and utilization is one of those. If there will be reopening of legislative files under the next Commission, that will be decided by the next Commission President. But with Net Zero Industry Act, with 10E that covers infrastructure projects, we have set a solid basis to launch also the market here in European Union.
Thank you. Minister, just turning to you, we've heard about the legislative plans of the European Union, but perhaps you could reflect on something which is bleeding obvious to anyone with an atlas, but the two largest storage opportunities for CCS are outside of the Union. What are the sort of implications of that for lawmaking, for policy making, for cooperation?
Yes, we are outside the EU, but we have the EEA agreement, and Norway is a European country, and I think we have to cooperate to solve these big issues together. It's really important to do that. But first of all, I'm very happy that the EU is taking a more active role, creating a framework, conditions for carbon capture and storage. It's really important, I think. And predictability and funding are two necessary building blocks to develop CCS further on. And I think that's good. And the regulatory framework needs to support and facilitate the efficient development of a functional commercial market for CCS. We have to have the commercial view on the carbon capture and storage. And then I will again use the word. We have to do it predictable and simple, and making the funding going on place.
Thank you, Ambassador. Turning to you, we've heard about the plans in Europe, plans in Norway. Do you think that what you hear of the legislative plans in Europe is the EU is on the right track? From Iceland's point of view, I heard your message of sort of don't over-regulate, but you can still set higher ambitions. You can still work harder on without legislation. Do you think that CCS in the EU is on the right track? Do you want more?
Well, I do think that for most part the answer is yes. The developments are on the right track. What is clearly positive is that there is an understanding in Europe on the importance of CCS and a willingness to support CCS as part of the solution fighting climate change. I also think there is clear awareness that CCS and carbon removal efforts are well, they don't justify postponing the clean energy transition or cutting emissions. There is there's a need to have a legislative framework that is enabling and flexible and not overly prescriptive. But most importantly, the legislation should be technologically neutral.
Thank you. Just to broaden things out slightly, the reason we're talking about CCS is its role in the larger drive to, meet climate neutrality goals. It has a contributory role to play, reaching the COP28 targets, the Paris Agreement. Perhaps you could just reflect on CCS's role in that broader mix of the Paris Agreement.
First of all, I do believe that last year's COP, where European Commission was promoting global targets for renewables and energy efficiency, was a very good COP. And now we have 130 countries well aligned with us. And for us also, CCUS is not alternative for renewables and energy efficiency. On the contrary, we will promote renewables, we will accelerate renewable transition, we will prioritize energy efficiency, but doing so, our economic modeling for 2040 tells us that to achieve significant reduction for 2040, the only economically viable option is also to use CCUS. And thus, the CCUS is expected to play a significant role in the decarbonization process. We cannot say right now on what speed and what it takes to introduce large-scale projects in the very close future, but we will need this solution. And saying that, I think that across our member states, we do see the very strong interest from hard-to-abate sectors. So we want to keep the industry here in Europe. We don't want to lose them, but for them in the next decade to come, the carbon removal is a necessary solution to continue their production in Europe. And we do see this as a tool to allow our industries to remain competitive also globally. And of course, we have been very clear that if we do have a knowledge here how to cut emissions, we are always willing to share this knowledge and technology with our partners, because we alone, we don't make a difference. We need international partners to follow the path. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps a similar question to the Minister. Do you share the same takeaways from the COP28 and the implications for CCS?
Yes, I think I will share Kadri's thoughts about the COP28 and the meaning for CCS. I think CCS is more important after COP28 than before. First of all, I think we have to look when we look into 2050, we know that a lot of the energy use will be oil and gas, and we have to handle that in the climate emissions and so on who are there. I think carbon capture and storage will be really important in that matter to handle emissions from existing energy assets. The hard-to-abate sector, as mentioned, we can produce from natural gas, low-carbon hydrogen to kickstart the hydrogen market against 2050. So it's really important that we find good solution, commercial ways to introduce carbon capture and storage as a solution for the energy sector, for the hard-to-abate sector, and also to develop a hydrogen market totally. So I think carbon capture and storage have been more important after COP28 than before.
Thank you. Just going to wrap it up with one more question as we get ready for the next panel. Part of the communication that should come next week or will come next week also looks at public perceptions of CCS. And I think everyone in this room is is convinced of its role and convinced of its need. But Minister, out there in the public, we're talking to the people of Norway. Do you think there needs to be more convincing? Are people aware of its ability to contribute to climate goals, or is there a fair understanding of or sensitivity towards risk, towards cost, things like that? I'd be just interested to hear from a minister how, if you think public perception needs to be worked upon.
First of all, I think if I take a Norwegian perspective first, I think the Norwegian public support the solution for carbon capture and storage. They have seen we have done it for 30 years safely, permanently, and they trust the oil and gas industry, and they trust the solution and technology that are in the CCS system. And we have also a broad support for industries that going into capture and building capture facilities. In my hometown, in my home region, the Heidelberg materials starting up next year, capturing CO2 from the cement plant in Brevik. And I think that's really a good situation. And they have a broad support from the public, I think. When we are going in other countries, we can see some skeptical thoughts, discussions, but I think in the last year, a couple of years, it has changed a lot. Take Germans, take the discussion in Denmark. I was in Copenhagen for a year ago, I think, and there was a lot of negative thoughts in the academia about carbon capture and storage. Today, Denmark is leaning forward to also introduce that kind of technology, and also maybe storage onshore in Denmark. So I think when we are struggling with the climate emissions, we have to find the best solutions, and carbon capture and storage is one of them. And I think if you do it in a proper way, especially for the first time, I think we can get the public support and the public with us. And that's really important.
Commissioner, do you share that assessment of the need to work on public perception?
Yes, I do, because one of the biggest burdens to scale up the carbon storage facilities is public perception. Another one, of course, what I do see is coming from the industry side, because there are differences between member states who do have the possible sites to store CO2 and who do not have the geological facilities. And that's why also, well, in our market, the different industrial players do feel that might create unlevel playing field. So this is the reason why we do prioritize also the transport routes, to allow all the market players who are willing to capture their CO2 to access the transport corridors.
Minister.
Yes, and I just want to take in one more reason that I see from a Norwegian perspective, because when the industry is taking care of the emissions, invest in capture and storage systems, they save jobs. If they don't, they have to pay so much for the emissions that the industry will not be in Europe anymore. So this is also about saving people's jobs and the future for the people and the coming generation, that we handle that emission, and carbon capture and storage will really be important, because Europe need also in 2050 and 2060 and 2070 the hard to abate sector, and we have to handle the emissions from that in a safe and a proper way.
Thank you very much. We're going to have to draw it to a close there, so I'm just going to ask you to thank the excellent panel members in the usual way. Thank you very much.